today's episode, our goal is to make the measurements on the fretboard. Before that, let's take a look at how the neck is constructed. And of course, we'll have our old friend Pinky to help us. The neck is constructed of 3 layers, the poplar neck part, and then there's a tiny spacer in between the neck and the actual fretboard. The spacer is just a piece of the Luan ply, and it's actually cut to the same width that the sides are, which is just a little bit more than 1.5 inches. The fretboard is a piece of cherry wood, which I got from Woodworker's Source, and it comes in sheets of 3.5 by 36 inches, and we planed it to a thickness of 0.165 inch or 11/64 of an inch, and then it was ripped to a width of, again, a little bit more than 1.5 inches, which is a little bit more than the width of the poplar. We can use a rasp to trim them down to the correct size. Always better to be a little too big than too small. Before we measure where the frets will go, we need to trim this 36-inch piece of cherry wood down to 10 inches. We'll also need to trim the spacer down to 9 inches. For the fretboard and spacer cut, line up outside the dot so that you get a true 10-inch cut.
Is this how it's supposed to be?
That's how it's supposed to be. Now that the fretboard has been cut to a 10-inch length, we can put the measurements on it for the frets. All the measurements are going to be made from the nut end. There's a nut in case you haven't seen one. So we're going to make all the measurements from here down. This is a table of measurements from stumac.com, and you can just do a Google search for StuMac fret calculator. And we're going to be using a 17-inch ukulele fret scale, and we're going to be putting in 14 frets. The fret measurements they give you will come in decimal form and in the equivalent fraction. So this is a great opportunity for your students to learn about converting decimals to fractions. I'll be lining up the ruler and making my measurements in this direction. For truly accurate measurements, use a sharp pencil and make tiny dots. After you make your measurements, you're going to use a tri-square to draw straight lines. The fretboard should be tight up against the handle of the tri-square to ensure a right angle. Make one thin line right through the dot. The final step before cutting the fret slots is to attach the fretboard to the spacer. There's going to be a little gap at the top for the nut to sit on. So I'm going to measure down 1/4 inch. Now I'll spread glue in this area, but try not to get any where the nut is going to go. Make sure when you're gluing the fretboard to the spacer that you have the big fret areas towards the nut end. There's a little bit of overhang on this side, so I'm going to make sure that at least one side is flush. We're going to let this sit for a day